When a billionaire was abandoned in court, the janitor stood up and said, "I'll defend him." And what happened next? No one saw coming. It was supposed to be the trial of the year. Reporters from Sacramento, Phoenix, and even as far as Boise lined the halls of the Superior Court of Alameda County, cameras ready, microphones primed. People had been whispering about it for weeks, how billionaire land developer Bradford Crane had finally been caught in a storm of fraud allegations, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies tied to evictions, and tax dodges going back over a decade. But no one expected what happened next. Crane sat there in a tailored gray suit, straight-backed, eyes fixed on the judge. His lawyer, the famous Victor Bledsoe, was pacing in front of the defense table with that same smug look he'd worn through 100 courtroom wins. He was known for slicing prosecutors in half with his arguments. The man had defended governors, celebrities, even a tech CEO accused of insider trading. If anyone could get Crane off, it was him. Then it happened. Midway through the prosecution's third day, right after the judge asked for clarification on a financial report, Bledsoe closed his folder slowly. He didn't look confused. He didn't ask for a recess. He just shut the folder, turned around, and said into the mic, "I'm done, Your Honor." Judge Corinne Delgado blinked. "Excuse me? I'm withdrawing, effective immediately. You're Crane's lead counsel." I can't waste the court's time or mine any longer. This case is a train wreck. Gasps broke out behind the bar. Bradford turned in his seat, mouth parting slightly. Even he hadn't seen it coming. The man who'd fought beside him through 2 indictments and 6 depositions had just thrown him to the wolves. "You're abandoning your client mid-trial?" the judge said, eyes narrowing. "I have ethical concerns," Bledsoe answered calmly. "That's all I'm prepared to say." He grabbed his briefcase, buttoned his coat, and walked straight out the door. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters jumped up. One woman dropped her phone trying to get a clip. People shouted, "What's going on? Is that even legal? Can they just leave like that?" Bradford sat there like a man staring at his own funeral. The prosecution leaned in with half smiles. A billionaire with no defense? That wasn't just blood in the water, that was a buffet. But at the very back of the courtroom, someone stood still. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't a lawyer or a paralegal. Just a middle-aged black man in navy blue coveralls, still holding a mop handle in one hand and a spray bottle in the other. Leonard "Lenny" Garrison had been cleaning that same courthouse floor for 19 years. He'd seen hundreds of trials come and go. He knew which judge needed 3 sugars in her coffee and which bailiff to never joke around with. He wasn't supposed to speak. Janitors don't speak in courtrooms. But he cleared his throat and said loud and clear, "I will defend him." Heads turned. Lenny's voice didn't shake. He didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. "I said," he repeated, stepping forward, "I will defend Mr. Crane." You could hear the disbelief ripple through the room, the kind of shock that doesn't come with noise, but silence, a kind of silence that tightens the chest. Judge Delgado leaned forward slowly. "Sir, do you have a license to practice law?" Lenny shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Then I can't allow you—" "I'm not asking to represent him officially," he said. "I'm asking to speak. Just give me 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave, I'll leave." A murmur rose from the benches. Some laughed, some scowled. The DA rolled his eyes. Bradford turned to look at him. And for the first time that week, the billionaire's face cracked into something close to emotion, recognition, because he knew Lenny. Years ago, he'd seen him in a different room. And back then, Lenny Garrison wasn't holding a mop. He was holding a folder, fighting for his son's right to stay in the only apartment they had left. But that's a part of the story no one in that courtroom knew yet. But they were about to find out. The courtroom was buzzing like a school cafeteria during a food fight. Judge Delgado leaned back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose like she was trying to stop a headache before it really started. "Mr. Garrison," she said slowly, as if choosing her words with surgical precision, "this is highly irregular." "I know it is," Lenny said, "but you just watched that man get left behind in the middle of a trial. Nobody's stepping up. I'm not a lawyer, but I know what it looks like when someone's being railroaded." The prosecutor, Dean Kilmer, leaned into his mic with a grin. "Your Honor, is this really happening?" Are we going to let the janitorial staff start practicing law now? The courtroom laughed. Mean laughter, sharp and layered with judgment. Lenny didn't flinch. He stepped forward again, not too fast, not dramatic, just steady. Let them laugh, he said, eyes fixed on the judge. But that man helped my family when nobody else would. I may not be certified to argue this case, but I know what's right and what's wrong. Let me speak. Bradford was staring at Lenny now, jaw slack, his usual boardroom poise nowhere to be found. Wait, he whispered. Lenny? Lenny gave him a quiet nod. Yeah, it's me. The judge tapped her gavel once, just once, like a warning. I'll give you 3 minutes, she said. That's all. You're not under oath. You're not part of the defense team, and this court isn't in the habit of letting strangers interrupt official proceedings. But I want to hear what this is about. Lenny glanced at Bradford, then stepped into the open space where the lawyer had stood moments before. You want to talk about fraud? He began, eyes shifting to the jury. You want to talk about lies and manipulation? Let's talk about it. He raised the spray bottle still in his hand and held it up like a teacher pointing to a chalkboard. This is ammonia, he said. You mix it with vinegar and hot water, and you can scrub damn near any stain off a courtroom floor. I've used it to clean up blood, vomit, spilled coffee, spit. Things most people pretend not to see. But the stain I'm looking at now? He paused. It's in this system. The room went still again. He pointed to Bradford. 6 years ago, my son, Tariq, was being thrown out of our apartment over a technicality in the lease. We were 2 weeks late on rent because I got hurt on the job and missed hours. The management company didn't care. They had the sheriff knocking by day 3. My son was 15. Bright. He had a shot at a scholarship if he didn't get pulled out of school. Lenny took a breath like he was measuring the next sentence. Bradford Crane didn't know me, never met me, but he was on the board of that company. He read about the case, and for some reason, maybe because of my kid's grades, maybe because he has a daughter that age, I don't know, but he called it off, personally. He told the board to back off. He made sure we stayed in that home. He looked down for a second, his voice dropping. I never forgot that, and I sure as hell wasn't about to let him sit here alone while the sharks circled. Kilmer cut in, voice dripping sarcasm. That's a touching story, Mr. Garrison, but it has nothing to do with the legal matter at hand. The defendant is facing multiple counts of fraud, and I'm not done, Lenny said, loud enough to silence him. He turned back to the jury. All I'm saying is, if y'all are going to paint him as some cold monster who's never done right by anyone, that's a lie. And if a courtroom can't stand to hear the truth, then what the hell are we doing here? Judge Delgado looked at him, expression unreadable. You've had your time, Mr. Garrison. Please return to your seat. Lenny gave a short nod and stepped back. He sat down quietly near the back, mop and spray bottle leaning against the bench. The jury was silent. Even Kilmer didn't say anything for a moment. Bradford stared straight ahead, lips pressed into a line, eyes burning. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man watching someone fight for him, not because of money, not for headlines, but because once, long ago, he had chosen to do the right thing when it cost him nothing. But the system wasn't going to let Lenny off that easy. The courthouse emptied slowly after the session was adjourned for the day. People filtered out in clusters, jurors escorted by deputies, reporters rushing to file their updates, and legal assistants whispering theories like it was a crime scene. But Lenny stayed seated, mop by his side, eyes resting on the polished wood floor he'd cleaned that morning. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He never had. But something inside him was stirring again. Something he hadn't touched in years. Back in the early 90s, before his back went bad, before his wife passed, before life twisted the way it always does, Lenny had a plan. He was in night school at Fresno State, working toward a law degree. It was slow. He was juggling a day job in construction, evening classes, and weekend shifts, washing cars to cover tuition. But he believed in it. In law. In justice. Then came the crash. 1995. A scaffold collapsed at a job site in Visalia. 3 men got sent to the hospital. 1 didn't come back. Lenny was lucky. Just a shattered shoulder and 3 cracked ribs. But the bills piled up. His wife, Marcia, took extra shifts at the diner, but it wasn't enough. He dropped out before the final semester. He had no choice. Years passed. Law school became a story he only told once, on a quiet night, to his son, Tariq. And then, not again. Until Bradford Crane. Tariq was 16 when the eviction notice hit. The management company didn't want explanations, just their rent and then some. Late fees stacked up like bricks. They had 72 hours. Lenny tried to reason with the office manager, got nowhere, called legal aid. They were backlogged, even offered to clean the building's lobby for free if it would buy him another week. Nothing worked. Then came that phone call. Some lady from the corporate office called and said, "You don't need to worry anymore. Mr. Crane has asked us to pull the eviction. You're paid up." Lenny had asked her twice, "Are you sure you've got the right family?" She was. She said Mr. Crane had personally reviewed a few pending evictions that week and flagged Lenny's as an exception worth correcting. They never spoke. Not directly. Until today. Back in the present, Lenny finally rose from his seat and walked toward the exit. He was halfway down the hall when someone called his name. "Mr. Garrison." He turned. It was Bradford, now surrounded by 3 guards and his bailiff escort. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly out of place, but his voice was calm. "You remember me?" Lenny said, a little surprised. "I never forgot," Bradford replied. "I didn't know you still worked here." Lenny gave a small shrug. "Somebody's got to keep this place from smelling like feet and regret." Bradford cracked a smile, just barely. "Why'd you do that?" he asked. "What you said in there?" Lenny leaned on the mop, eyes narrowing. "Because you were the only one who looked past the papers. Back then, I was just a name in a file. You didn't owe me anything, but you helped. And I figure, maybe I can't help you the same way, but I can make sure your name ain't dragged without someone at least saying, 'That ain't the whole story.'" Bradford was quiet for a second. "They're going to tear you apart for this," he said. "Press, lawyers, maybe even your boss." "They've been tearing folks like me apart for a long time," Lenny said. "I'll survive." A bailiff motioned for Bradford to move along. "Thank you," Bradford said, voice lower now. "You're welcome," Lenny replied, "but don't thank me yet. This ain't over." And it wasn't. Because as Lenny turned to head back to the supply closet, something caught his eye, just a flicker on a monitor outside courtroom 4B. A live feed replaying footage from earlier testimony. Financial spreadsheets were being shown on screen by the prosecutor's assistant. It looked standard, nothing fancy. But something didn't sit right. It was a figure on the bottom line. Something about the dates and transfers. A transaction that didn't line up with the others. It was tiny, barely noticeable. But Lenny had seen enough invoices, balance sheets, and pay stubs while scraping to get by that his gut twitched. And his gut didn't lie. But figuring out what it meant, that would require Lenny to dig into a world he walked away from decades ago. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, heavier, like everyone was waiting for something to explode. Judge Delgado walked in 5 minutes late, lips pressed thin, coffee in one hand. You could feel her mood before she even opened her mouth. She looked out over the courtroom, paused a moment, and said flatly, "Before we begin, I want to address what happened yesterday." All eyes shifted to Lenny. "The court is aware Mr. Garrison is not licensed to practice law," she continued. "He will not be acting as legal counsel for Mr. Crane. But after discussion with the district attorney's office and review of court policy, I am allowing him to serve as an informal legal aid, so long as he does not directly question witnesses or address the jury." Gasps, whispers, then silence again. She looked directly at Lenny. "You'll work under my rules. No outbursts, no speeches, no mop in the courtroom." Lenny gave a tight nod. "Understood, Your Honor." Then she turned to Kilmer. "And if the prosecution smirks one more time, I'll hold you in contempt. This isn't a circus." The grin vanished from Kilmer's face. Court was now in session. As the prosecution resumed, Kilmer strutted to the front like a rooster ready to crow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'd like to remind you that behind all the money, behind the polished shoes and fine suits, we have documents, proof that Mr. Crane knowingly shifted money into shell companies under fake names." He waved a few printouts in the air. "Here's a payment made to LC Holdings on March 17th. Here's another to Nava Partners LLC the same day, both tied to offshore accounts, both under Crane's oversight." He clicked the remote. 2 spreadsheets appeared on the big screen beside him. Kilmer went on for 10 more minutes, laying out a tight story, one of deliberate, precise fraud. It was convincing. Lenny sat quietly, jotting down notes in a spiral notebook. He didn't even have a laptop. He turned to Bradford, whispering, "Those payments, Nava and LC Holdings. You ever seen them before?" Bradford shook his head. "No, not directly. I don't handle account routing. My CFO does." "What's her name?" "Dina Rossetti. Been with me 11 years. Lenny nodded and kept writing, but something was gnawing at him. He waited until the court broke for recess, then stepped outside with Bradford, motioning for him to lean in. "I think they're building this case around documents you never saw. That payment to LC Holdings? I saw it on the screen yesterday. The memo line says insurance settlement. Who gets insurance through a company that doesn't exist?" Bradford looked puzzled. "We don't. Not unless someone's hiding something." "You said you trusted Dina?" "With my life." Lenny raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Before he could answer, Dina walked into the hallway, eyes behind dark glasses, clutching a designer bag, and barely acknowledged Bradford. She gave Lenny a once-over. "You're the janitor," she said, almost amused. "No, ma'am," Lenny said, straight-faced. "Today, I'm the man trying to stop this thing from going sideways." Dina scoffed. "Good luck with that." She turned to walk away, heels clacking sharply on the tile. Bradford frowned. "She's been acting different lately. Cold, distant. I figured she was just overwhelmed." Lenny rubbed his jaw. "Or she's got something to hide." Back inside, court resumed. Lenny kept watching, not the documents, but the people. The way Kilmer avoided looking at Dina when her name came up. The way she leaned forward in her seat every time LC Holdings was mentioned. And then he saw it. Kilmer accidentally flipped to the wrong slide. It was only on the screen for a second. But Lenny caught it. A wire transfer to LC Holdings, dated 1 week after Dina's name stopped appearing on company payroll. He leaned over and whispered, "You let her go?" "No," Bradford said. "She's still listed as CFO. You ever check if she was still cashing paychecks?" Bradford blinked. "What are you getting at?" "I think your own company's being used against you, from the inside." He looked down at his notes, then up at the screen. There it was again, a memo line that said, "Policy reimbursement, per DR. DR Dina Rossetti." Lenny sat back in his seat. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew what a setup looked like. And this wasn't just a case of missing receipts, but bringing that truth into the light was going to get messy and dangerous. That night, Lenny didn't go home. He stayed at a greasy little diner off Foothill Boulevard, sipping stale coffee and flipping through photocopies Bradford's assistant had managed to scrape together before closing. He wasn't supposed to have access to any official evidence, but no one had said anything about public records and old payroll summaries. Lenny worked the way his father taught him, quiet, careful, and relentless. And somewhere between a coffee refill and a stale slice of pie, he found it. LC Holdings wasn't some shadow company registered in the Cayman Islands like Kilmer had claimed. It was a legitimate LLC based in Reno, Nevada, tied to Dina Rossetti's cousin. The address on file matched a UPS mailbox. The company had only one active contract, a consulting deal with Crane Properties, signed not by Bradford, but by Dina herself. Dated 5 weeks before she stopped showing up to board meetings. It wasn't fraud, it was embezzlement. And the wrong man was on trial. The next morning, Lenny walked into court early, holding a slim stack of printouts. His knuckles were tight. He hadn't slept. When Judge Delgado took the bench, Lenny stood immediately. "Your Honor, I have information that could impact this case." Kilmer stood too. "Objection. He's not—" "Mr. Kilmer," the judge snapped. "He hasn't even said anything yet." Lenny stepped forward. "I believe this court is being misled. There's reason to believe the prosecution's evidence was manipulated by someone working inside Mr. Crane's company." The judge frowned. "On what basis?" Lenny held up the files. "Public LLC filings, payroll reports, and company contract signatures. I can't question the witnesses, but if the court allows it, I'd like to request a formal review of these records, specifically the ones involving a Miss Dina Rossetti." Kilmer looked like he'd swallowed a nail. "This is a delay tactic." "Is it?" Lenny asked, finally locking eyes with him. "Because I can tell you right now that LC Holdings is real, and the woman pulling the strings signed off on every transfer you've called criminal. And she did it behind Bradford's back." Kilmer didn't speak, just clenched his jaw. The judge looked at the files. "Bring them forward." Lenny handed them over. As the judge scanned the top page, her eyes shifted. "Clerk, bring this to the forensic accountant team for immediate review. Court is adjourned for 1 hour." Bradford looked at Lenny like he was seeing him for the first time. "How did you even know where to look?" "I cleaned up after 100 cases just like yours," Lenny said. "You start to recognize patterns." When court resumed, the courtroom was packed again. Word had gotten out, somehow. Maybe a reporter had overheard in the hallway, or maybe a court clerk had whispered it in passing. Either way, people came back expecting drama. They got it. Judge Delgado tapped her gavel once. "This court has reviewed the new materials. It appears the financial trail points to an internal misappropriation of funds carried out by Ms. Dina Rossetti. The LLC in question was not fake, and there is substantial evidence suggesting Mr. Crane had no direct knowledge of the transactions in question." Silence. Then a gasp from Dina's side of the gallery. She stood up. "That's a lie," she shouted. 2 deputies rushed over, but she didn't move. Her voice cracked with panic. "He was too busy to sign anything. He let me handle all of it. I did what I had to." She was shaking now. Bradford just stared. "I gave you everything," she screamed. "And you didn't even notice when I stopped showing up." The room watched as she was escorted out, her designer bag swinging uselessly from her elbow. Kilmer tried to recover. "Your Honor, this doesn't erase all the charges." "No," the judge said firmly, "but it changes the shape of this trial completely. The court will reconvene tomorrow. Mr. Kilmer, I expect a revised filing." Lenny sat down, heart pounding. He had done it. He wasn't licensed. He wasn't qualified. But he was right. And that mattered more than any certificate on a wall. But just because the truth was out didn't mean the fight was over. The next morning, people came in early like they were waiting for a verdict on a celebrity. Security was tighter. Reporters lined the steps outside. Inside the courtroom, everyone sat stiff-backed, silent, eyes bouncing between the prosecution table and the defense seat like it was a tennis match. Bradford Crane didn't look like a man with billions anymore. He looked like a man waiting to be judged. His tie was on straight, his suit clean, but there was a stillness about him. Not fear, just fatigue. Like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Lenny walked in wearing the same janitor coveralls he wore every day. No suit, no tie. But he walked like someone who had earned his place. Judge Delgado called court to order. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to make something clear. This courtroom is not a reality show. It's not a spectacle. It's the last line between truth and destruction. Yesterday, that line was nearly crossed." She paused and looked straight at Kilmer. "Mr. Kilmer, I expect the prosecution to proceed with revised evidence and full transparency." Kilmer rose slowly. You could see the sweat behind his ears. He shuffled his notes and tried to regain his rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "in light of new findings, we have re-examined the role of Ms. Rossetti in the financial transactions at the center of this case. It appears she acted without direct oversight, and her actions may have contributed to the misrepresentation of Mr. Crane's knowledge." Someone coughed loudly. People were losing patience with the long-winded excuses. "So," Kilmer continued, "while we acknowledge the court's findings, we are not dismissing all charges. Mr. Crane was still responsible for oversight, even if he delegated authority. That's corporate law." Lenny leaned toward Bradford. "They're going to try to hit you with negligence." Bradford nodded slowly. "Let them try." Then came the moment no one expected. Judge Delgado turned to Lenny. "Mr. Garrison, you have 5 minutes. I've allowed you to participate this far. If you have something meaningful to add, now is the time." Lenny stood up. He didn't read from paper. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke like he always had, plain, steady, and honest. "Your Honor, jury, I know I've said a lot this week. I've been a janitor in this building for nearly 20 years. I've scrubbed gum off floors, cleaned up after people who treated me like I was invisible, and kept quiet through more court sessions than I can count." He turned slightly toward the jury. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth don't always come dressed in a suit. Sometimes it's hiding under all the noise, waiting on somebody to stop chasing headlines long enough to see it." He motioned toward Bradford. "This man made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He looked away when he should have looked closer. But fraud? Intentional theft? That ain't what happened here. I wouldn't stand up here for a guilty man. I don't owe him anything. He didn't even remember my name until this week. A few jurors shifted in their seats. But I remember what he did, for me, for my boy. And I'm telling you, that matters. Maybe not to the law books, but it should matter to people. He paused. Because if we're going to measure guilt by what a man didn't see, then none of us are safe. He sat down. The courtroom was quiet for a long second. Then Judge Delgado cleared her throat. The jury will now recess for deliberation. They were gone for 3 hours. When they came back, it was like everyone had stopped breathing. The foreman stood, looked at the judge, then looked at Bradford. In the matter of criminal fraud and conspiracy, on all primary charges, we find the defendant not guilty. Bradford closed his eyes, just for a second. Then he turned to Lenny. I owe you my life. Lenny shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Just don't forget this moment. Kilmer packed up quietly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Outside the courtroom, a reporter shoved a mic in Lenny's face. What made you think you could pull this off? She asked. Lenny smiled, tired. I didn't think, he said. I just couldn't stand watching someone fall alone, especially someone who once pulled me up. But the real victory wasn't the verdict. It was the reminder that doing what's right doesn't require permission. The media wanted a soundbite. They wanted Lenny to step up to a podium and tell the world what it felt like to save a billionaire in court with nothing but a mop, a notebook, and his gut. They called it a miracle, a twist, a headline. Lenny called it common sense. He never gave the press what they wanted. No big speech, no book deal, no talk show interviews. Just a quick statement outside the courthouse steps. I didn't save a billionaire. I stood up when nobody else would. And with that, he walked back inside and clocked in for his evening shift. The same mop, the same floor. He wasn't looking for applause. He just wanted to finish the job. 2 weeks later, the courthouse felt normal again. The hype had died down. Reporters were gone. Dina Rossetti was facing federal charges, and her attorney was already trying to negotiate a plea deal. Kilmer had gone suspiciously quiet. Some said the DA's office was reviewing all his cases from the past 2 years. But Lenny was back to doing what he did best, keeping the place running without anyone noticing. That is, until Judge Delgado caught him in the hallway one evening. She stood by the water fountain, sipping from a paper cup. Her heels were off. She looked tired, like most folks do after carrying the weight of 1,000 decisions no one ever sees. You know, she said, you could have walked away at any time. Lenny kept mopping. Thought about it. But you didn't. He looked up. Because when the system breaks, somebody's got to hold the pieces together, even if it ain't their job. She gave a slow nod. There's talk about a special recognition ceremony. Commendations. I'm guessing you're not interested. Lenny smiled. Only thing I want is a new mop bucket. One of those with real wheels. She laughed quietly. You'll get your bucket. Then she paused. And if you ever want to come back, not as a janitor. No offense, he interrupted, but I'm too old to chase a dream that already cost me everything once. She didn't push, just gave him a small smile. Well, not every hero wears a cape, or a tie, or a law degree. She walked off. Meanwhile, Bradford Crane did what billionaires rarely do after winning a case. He disappeared. No press conference, no statement from his legal team. He was seen once at a coffee shop in Modesto, wearing jeans and a windbreaker, reading a newspaper like he didn't own 4 towers downtown. A few weeks after the verdict, a thick envelope showed up at the courthouse. No return address. Inside was a single page typed, Lenny, I'm stepping away from the company. I've handed it off. It's time for something else. You reminded me what accountability looks like. Not in a boardroom, not in court, but in silence, when no one's watching. Thank you. Bradford attached was a personal check, blank, just signed. Lenny ripped it in half and threw it in the trash. He didn't do this for a payout. That kind of money always comes with strings, and he wasn't about to be someone's PR stunt. But there was one thing he did do. He sat his son down that weekend. Tariq was in his 30s now, working tech support in Visalia, raising 2 kids of his own. They met at a park. Nothing fancy. You ever think about finishing law school? Lenny asked. Tariq laughed. With 2 toddlers? Yeah, sure. right after I learned to sleep with my eyes open. I'll help with the kids, Lenny said, and tuition. You don't gotta say yes. But you should know, it's never too late to pick something back up. Tariq blinked. Where's this coming from? Lenny just smiled. Let's call it a long overdue promise. Some stories don't end with applause. They don't end with a big win or a parade or people chanting someone's name in the street. Sometimes they end with a man walking home after work, shoulders sore, shoes dusty, heart light. And that's more than enough. Because the truth is this: you don't have to be rich, famous, or powerful to change the outcome of a moment. You just have to speak up when it matters, even if you're the only one standing. If this story moved you, even a little, take a moment today to notice someone whose voice is never heard. It could be the janitor at your job, the bus driver, the person bagging your groceries. Sometimes the people closest to justice aren't wearing suits. They're wearing uniforms, carrying quiet strength, and waiting for someone to finally listen.